When the goodness of God seems like it's passed you by, life seems hard to go. Disappointment, mistakes will come and challenge your faith, and every day will seem like there's no hope. But with Jesus on your side, things will get better. With Jesus on your side, things will get better. So never give up, never give in. He's always on time. Never give up, never give in. The Lord is on your side. So never give up, never give in. So never give in. He's always on time. Welcome to It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach with your host, Sister A. Legree. You can find out more about us by logging on to our website at igbatt.com or writing us at Post Office Box 7432, Silver Spring, Maryland 20910. Again, this is It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach. Log on to our website at igbatt.com, providing information and support while encouraging hope and faith. Well, this is January 2021. Welcome. We made it. Thank God for another year, for another day, for just another opportunity to be here. What I wanted to do today was just kind of talk about just something that recently happened in the news. And I'm going to read it. It says, mentally ill man shot in Texas. Texas police officer shot and killed unarmed man during mental health call. Now, this is the most recent one as of January 23rd that we've heard about in Texas. But this happens on a regular basis. This is not the first time that this has happened. This is not the first time that someone that was in a mental health crisis or was experiencing a mental health crisis came in contact with the police and they lost their lives. Now, what I wanted to say, again, we know providing information support while encouraging hope and faith. This is what this broadcast is about, providing information support for individuals who are living with the symptoms of a severe and persistent mental illness as well as a long-term illness. So when I saw this in the news, I wanted to just come to do this broadcast and just talk about it. So we have a unarmed man. This time, unarmed man had a mental health crisis, came in contact with the police, and things went wrong, and he was killed. Again, like I said, this is not the first time that this has happened. If you go through if you go through just the news over the last year, 2020, you'll find that we've had several cases like this. What I wanted to come and look at it from this position. If you are a loved one, if you have a loved one who has a severe and persistent mental illness, and what are severe and persistent mental illnesses? Severe and persistent mental illnesses, it's a category identified by the federal government, because of course we have mental illness, and we talked about that before, what mental illnesses are, and then we talked about the severe and persistent mental illnesses. So severe and persistent mental illnesses are those mental illnesses that are so severe that they impact all aspects of an individual's life in a very severe and persistent way. It impacts how they go to school, it impacts employment, their socialization, so it impacts all aspects, right? So there are certain diagnoses that qualify. We're talking about schizophrenia and bipolar, for example. Different states add to that, but schizophrenia and bipolar are usually the core ones. You'll see that in all of the definitions. So then again, if you have a loved one, or if you are or someone who's living with the symptoms of a severe and persistent mental illness, such as schizophrenia or bipolar, it's important for you to be prepared. Okay, what we know about severe and persistent mental illnesses, they're episodic. So some people may take their medications and be fine. Some people take their medications, may have one episode, and for some people it can be a long-reaching or ongoing thing, just like diabetes or hypertension, where you have to take medications and you have to manage. The thing is, it's incumbent upon us. Number one, I'm talking to those of you who have a loved one who's living with a severe and persistent mental illness. And two, I'm talking to those of you who have a severe and persistent mental illness, right? It's important for both of you, both categories, to be prepared. We know that this is an illness that will reoccur. We know that this is an illness that will require ongoing management, so we should not be surprised. So what do I mean? So from the beginning, you want to know, identify the crisis resources in your area, okay? Every area has like a crisis team or a crisis area. You can go into our website at igbatt.com, and then from there you'll go to our information page where we have some resources that you can look up. But you want to identify what are the crisis places in organizations in my area, okay? Where are they? If you don't know, reach out to NAMI, NAMI.org, National Alliance for Mental Illness. They can kind of, in your city, your state, and they can also give you some resources as well. But it's important to be prepared. And I'm not blaming anyone, I'm just looking at this from a systems perspective, right? If you know that you have someone or you're the person that's living with a severe and persistent mental illness, you don't want to wait until a crisis occurs before you have to act, because we know a crisis at some point will occur. So we should have somewhere on the refrigerator, posted in the Bible, the book, or somewhere, the name of the crisis team, the name, phone number, right? Also, if you have a loved one or you dealing with a severe and persistent mental illness, you should have a treatment team, right? You should already have a psychiatrist or psychologist. So, not psychologist, but psychiatrist or clinical social worker. So if you are, say, the family member, and this is your loved one, number one, you want to make sure you know what the crisis resources are in the area. Because a crisis team can do certain things that the police can't do, and vice versa. So if you had a crisis team in the area, right, you can call the crisis team and say, hey, this is what's happening with my loved one. The crisis team will come out. They'll make the decision. They'll make the determination if they need to call the police or not, right? So you don't necessarily have to call the police right away. Also, keep in mind that when you call the police, let me continue down this path first. So when we talk about the crisis team will come out, they'll do an assessment, and they will decide, okay, if this person, if your loved one requires hospitalization, or they may be able to talk your loved one to de-escalate the situation. And if your loved one is on medications, to get them started on medications, get them connected back with their doctor. So that is what a crisis team would do. A crisis team is the best thing if you have one in your area. Now, keep in mind, if your loved one is actually a threat or violent at that moment, the crisis team, when they come, they will call the police, because the only the crisis team cannot transport a person to the hospital against their will. They can't take a person anywhere against their will. The only person that can do that would be the police. Okay, so the police are the only person that will do that. In many jurisdictions, the police will come. The crisis team will come with the police. So it just kind of varies. Okay, but a crisis team could come out, identify, and assess. So make sure you have that information. If you don't know the crisis teams that are in your area, reach out to your health department, your Department of Mental Health. Okay, I have a loved one who's living with a severe and persistent mental illness. I want to be prepared, and that's another thing. We're talking about preparation. So the title of this broadcast is "Be Ready or Be Prepared." So yes, we talk about prayer, we talk about Bible study, all of those things are important. But keep in mind that your loved one has a diagnosis, is diagnosed with a schizophrenia, bipolar, or a severe and persistent mental illness. At that moment, so you want to call the crisis team, right? If you don't know, there's no crisis team, you want to get guidance before a crisis happens. Because again, we know something will happen more than likely. So you want to be prepared. As I said, you want to write this stuff down. You want to get as much information as you can before the crisis occurs. You don't want to have to wait until a crisis occurs, and then the first thing you want to do is call the police. You want to find out, like in this case, where was the crisis team? Did they call the crisis team? Where was his treatment team, right? You want to find out if your loved one is seeing a psychiatrist or a clinical social worker, or they have a treatment team. You want to have those phone numbers. Just about every mental health clinic, and there may be some exceptions, but just about every mental health clinic, that a community mental health, I know for sure, will have an after hours number, right? That after hours number is a number that you can call in the event of a crisis. Now, they may not come out, but again, they can guide you, they can get you in the right direction. You want to have that number, have those numbers written down on your wall, refrigerator, or in your Bible or someplace. You want to have those numbers before a crisis occurs. You also want to make sure that you get as much information as you can about your loved one diagnosis. You want to attend different groups, any support groups. If your loved one is seeing a psychiatrist, you want to go to the appointments every now and then. You want to have a meeting. You want them to know who you are. Again, all of this helps if you're having a crisis, okay? Now, keep in mind that there are some times when you do have to call the police. But keep this in mind about the police. When they come, let me back up. If you call 911, you want to say, hey, my loved one is having a medical emergency. That's number one. You don't want to call the police unless you really, really have to. That's number two. Don't just call 911 just because they don't want to take their medications, okay? Because that can escalate the situation. There are other things to do. If a person doesn't want to take their medications, there are other ways to handle the situation as opposed to calling the police. Because they have a right to take their medications, right? They have a right to do that. They have a right to refuse medications. They have a right to refuse treatment. The thing is, why are you calling? Why do you feel 911 is warranted? It shouldn't be just for those particular reasons, right? Those reasons are things that you would address with a mental health treatment team or with a crisis team. But if it gets out of control, unmanageable, you fear for your life, or whatever the case may be, and you feel you have to call the police, when you call 911, let them know it's a medical emergency, and ask them if they have a crisis response officer. Now, they're called different things within the United States, so I don't know where you are and what's it called in your place, your state. But when you call 911, you can ask for a police officer that's trained to work with people who have a mental health crisis. Every jurisdiction, many jurisdictions, I'm not going to say every, but many jurisdictions do have one. Some do, some don't, but you can ask, okay? Do you have an officer that's trained in crisis? Do you have an officer that's trained in mental health? A lot of the officers across the United States do attend mental health first aid. They have the crisis incident CIOs, officers, crisis response team to deal with mental health. So you can ask that, okay? But when the officer comes out, you want to keep in mind, this is the first time that the police officer is seeing your loved one, more than likely, unless they know them. But this is the first time, okay? Anytime you bring the police into the situation, things are going to begin to kind of escalate many times, right? So you bring a police into, you call 911, police officer comes out. This is the first time they're seeing your loved one. You know your loved one better. This is the first time they're seeing them. You call the police, right? So in my mind, keep this in mind, again, not blaming anybody, but really think about what we're doing here. When you call the police, you're saying that the situation is so unmanageable, that you've done all that you can do, that you have exhausted all of your resources. That's what you're saying when you call the police. So when the police show up, in their mind, this is like an emergency. This is a crisis. Because if not, why would you call the police, right? So number one, they're coming in a certain posture, a certain mindset, right? And they're already, this is the first time they're seeing your loved one, and depending on how your loved one present, they may assume your loved one is a danger. Because remember, you called them, right? You call them because you call for some reason that their symptoms or what they're dealing with at that moment has become so unmanageable, and you're saying that you need help. That's exactly what you're saying, okay? So when they come, as much as possible, you want to try to meet the police officers and say, hey, explain to them what's going on, right? You want to let them know, hey, he's never been violent. He or she's never been violent. Whatever the case is. When you call the 911, you want to ask them, let them know, okay, can you send a crisis team? You want to let them know as well. Ask for what you want, because keep in mind, you might get a police officer that's not necessarily trained. Also, keep in mind that police officers, when they do come out, even if you get a crisis, a response officer or an officer that's trained in mental health, when that officer comes out, yeah, they're going to try to reason with your loved one, maybe talk them through, but they're still police officers. So there's certain things that are still automatically going to happen. If they have to take your loved one to the hospital, they will handcuff. That's just part of how it goes. They will handcuff. They will search. They will ask questions. So these are things just to kind of keep in mind. But my purpose today is talking about preparing so we won't get to that point. Right? Because if you have a loved one with a severe persistent mental illness, and I know I've said this like 50 times so far, is that you need to be prepared. Should not wait. It's like if you live in a place that's prone to having a lot of hurricanes, you shouldn't wait to put together an emergency kit, right? It's the same thing. You want to put together an emergency mental health kit. You want to have the phone numbers. You want to have the psychiatrist number. You want to know what the resources are in your area so that you can call. Also, keep in mind, relapse doesn't happen overnight, right? Relapse doesn't happen. What happens is, for many people, they may have, let's just say, have just come out of the hospital, or they may have been on their medication for a while, and things are going well, so they're here. So they stop taking their medications. They kind of fall back on seeing their doctor or seeing their treatment team. And you don't realize, because with psychiatric medications, the medications it's not like you don't take it and then automatically see it. It kind of goes down like this, right? So the symptoms start to appear. The person starts to get worse over time. And what happens many times is family members, people just kind of ignore it until it gets to a point where now we have to call the police. Again, a part of having your mental health kit is having a relapse plan. Okay, well, what are the symptoms? When your loved one is doing well, you and your loved one need to sit down and have a conversation. Okay, this happened. We had this crisis. We want to avoid having a crisis again. Let's talk about it, right? Let's talk about what are some of your symptoms. You want to know what are some of your loved one symptoms. The symptoms, baseline symptoms. Okay, the symptoms that they always kind of tend to have, and then what are some of the symptoms that that showed up before they had a crisis. So you want to be able to kind of identify what those symptoms are. So as you begin to see things changing, you can catch it before it gets too bad. Right? Relapse doesn't just happen. A person just doesn't have a psychotic episode, especially if they're living in a home with a lot of people. The people have seen it, you've noticed it, people just kind of got used to it, and that's just the way they are, and not really realizing that things happen over time, especially when we talk about psychosis. So when I use the term psychosis, or when we say a person is psychotic, we're saying that the person is out of touch with reality. There are different diagnoses in which you can see psychosis, or a person can be psychotic, schizophrenia, bipolar, psychotic depression, or just a few of them. But again, when a person becomes out of touch with reality, especially if they live with people, relapse doesn't just happen. They don't just are fine at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then at 8 o'clock p.m. they're so bad that you have to call the police or the crisis team. It usually happens over a period of time. All right. Now, if you are a person that's living with a severe and persistent mental illness, it's important for you to know your symptoms. It's important for you to know your phone numbers. It's important to you to stay faithful to your groups, to your if you don't want to group, to other people that you can talk to, that you can bounce things off of, so that they can see, when things are starting to go left or when things are starting to change with you. That's so important that you do that. Because, again, you don't want to wait. The police should be the last resort. The police should be the last people that you have to call for a psychiatric emergency. Because, again, we know that if you're diagnosed, that things will change, right? That symptoms will change. So it's important to be prepared. And that's what my talk about today is, being prepared, right? Well, we know, and pray. As those of you know, it's getting better all the time. We talk about information and support while encouraging hope and faith from a faith-based perspective. So prayer is important. It's important to pray and ask God to give you wisdom. Lord, show me what to do, how to handle this situation before it escalates, right? Show me who to call, what information to read. But again, you don't want to just wait until the last minute because, again, out of the group, between you and the police are the least familiar with your loved one. You're more familiar. So if you are unable to get your loved one to do whatever it is, or to stop, whatever the reason you call them, if you're unable to do that, think about when the police come. Now, sometimes it doesn't always end that way. Okay, I think there's a call for a lot of people as they talk about, what do they call it? Defund the police and all this kind of things, that the police shouldn't handle psychiatric calls. That I totally disagree with that. As somebody that's been doing this a long time, I totally disagree, because there are times when we need the police. The crisis team, I think should be the number one people that you call. But again, every jurisdiction does not have a mental health crisis team. And sometimes the situation does not warrant it. Because if you're afraid for your life, then there's a reason. Okay? Then there's a reason to call the police. So if you're afraid for your life, then the police might be afraid for theirs. Keep in mind that when the police come, they're on edge. They don't necessarily know. As I said before, you were the one who called them. And if your loved one is aggressive, if they're not complying, they don't know whether it's a mental illness or not. Right? So when you call the police, think about what it is that you want them to do. What do you want the police to do when they show up if you have to call them? Right? Ask yourself that. And then ask yourself, is this something that you can do or if someone else can do? Right? As I said before, we shouldn't be calling the police just about medications because the person doesn't want to take their medications or whatever the case is. You should call the police. The police should be reserved if the person is running around. I mean, that's not running around, but if they're really aggressive and you really can't manage them. Is there a way that you can get your loved one to the emergency room? Can you do that? Is there a way? And I know sometimes this is not the case, right? But I'm just saying to get us to start thinking about some things and being prepared and not putting their blame or emphasis on somebody else, right? I'm the one with a severe and persistent mental illness. It's up to me to manage my illness. You have a loved one with a severe and persistent mental illness. They live with you. It's important for you as the loved one, to be able to help them manage that illness and for you to manage what's going on, right? So we're the number one. We have to take some responsibility for being prepared. Okay, we have to take some responsibility. We need to know the name of the doctor. We need to know the name of the pharmacy. We need to know where do they go to receive mental health services, right? Or where to go to receive mental health services. We need to have the crisis team number. We need to kind of get information, right? We need to have conversations about our symptoms. What are the baseline symptoms? Ask your loved one. What does it feel like right before you get ready to have a mental health crisis? Are you sleeping more? Are you sleeping less? Are you not eating? Ask them. Have that conversation. They may say, I don't know. You might say, okay, these are some things that I've noticed. I've noticed that during the last crisis, when we were getting close, you kind of got more, you became more snappy or more difficult concentrating, or you were up and down, or whatever you're noticing. And what you want to do, you want to try to catch it. So think about 10 is here. 10 is at the crisis, right? And when you see your loved one kind of going up, you want to kind of stop it before it gets there, right? You want to be able to say, hey, you know what? I'm noticing that over the last, 2 days you haven't been sleeping, or how are we doing, what's going on? You need to have a conversation before it gets to a 10, not just assume or not just wait. One of the things that the mistake that many people make, especially, and I know it's difficult, I know it's challenging, it's difficult, but one of the mistakes that we make is that when we have a loved one, let's say for example they have a crisis, they go away, they're in the hospital for however long they're in the hospital for. Many of us, we feel like, phew, we got a break. Now we can finally sleep, right? But that's the time to kind of to stay with it, to stay involved. This is the time where you can make some changes. Don't just let your loved one go to the hospital and you're so happy, so glad. Phew, rightly so, because it can be tiring living with someone who is living with a severe and persistent mental illness unmedicated, who is not taking their medications or is not managing their illness. It can be exhausting. So I get that, but you want, when they go away to the hospital or to the hospital or inpatient admitted, you want to be there. You want to have conversation. You want to kind of tell the doctor what you're noticing, what you're seeing, right? You want to know what medications they're on. You want to make sure that when they leave the hospital that they have a follow-up appointment. You want to know when that follow-up appointment is, so that you or somebody your loved one can go to the appointment. Right? The first time you go to the appointment, you want to ask that release of information, release of authorization, I'm sorry. So make sure that you have that on file. They have your phone numbers, and so they know who you are. So if you have to call in the crisis, that's already taken care of, right? The time to do it is when your loved one, when everybody is happy, when everybody's feeling good, everybody's in a good mood. We just got out of the hospital, you're looking good, you're taking your medications, we're able to have a conversation. This is the time to prepare your mental health kit and have all that information in it. That it's so important to kind of do that. And then that way, again, remember at 10, we're trying to catch it before it get there. Then we can kind of start making some adjustments. It's easier to talk to someone about their medication use before they stop taking it. Because once they stop taking it, then they don't want to take it, and it can be hard for some people. So you want to kind of have that conversation on a regular basis. If they don't like the medication, or if you don't like your medications, talk to your doctor about what some other options are. There are a lot of medications now. Well, I'm going to say a lot. There are a couple of medications now where you can take the IM or the injections, if you want, that last for a couple months, right? So again, there are things that you can do. The doctor can talk to you about simplifying your medication routine. Whatever you need to do to stay healthy. Because having a severe and persistent mental illness doesn't mean that you can't move forward in life. It just means you may have to move differently or move slower, right? Severe and persistent mental illness, just like any other illness, it can be managed. Recovery is possible. Recovery will look different for different people. Recovery may mean able to work, so have a family, going back to school. Other people, it may mean like getting up out of the bed and not sleeping all day. Whatever recovery looks like to you, you can recover. You can move forward. You can get better. When God said, "I've come to give you life and life more abundantly," He's talking to everybody. Everybody, you, me. It doesn't matter when you have a severe and persistent mental illness or mental health illness at all. When He said, "I've come that you might have life and life more abundantly," He means just that. And He has taken into account everything that we're dealing with. He's taken into account our voices. He's taken into account how we may have auditory hallucinations or being able to see things. He's taken all of that into account. And because He's taken that into account, it's going to be really important for us to not give up on ourselves. It's so easy to kind of say, "Oh, I have a mental illness, I won't be able to move forward." No, the mental illness is just an illness, just that. We know as a consequence of the fall of Adam, sin entered the world, and with sin came all type of sickness and diseases. Jesus has come. He's taken all of those sins and sickness and diseases upon Himself so that we can be healed. But keep in mind, healing is not automatic. It may not always be instant. Some of us may be healed on this side. Some of us may be healed on the other side, right? But we don't want to focus so much on our illness, on our symptoms, on our diagnosis, on what's not going right in our lives, that we don't keep our focus on the fact that He has come that we might have life and life more abundantly. Having an illness that you have to live with and manage doesn't take that away. It doesn't mean that He doesn't love you any less or any more. Matter of fact, His grace, we talk about His grace, His ability is so sufficient for you. His grace and His ability will show up in your life in such a way that He will move you forward, that you can do it. The problem is here, is how we think. So as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. So it's important that when we think, that our thinking needs to be lined up with the Word of God. If God has said that we can do it, then we can. If God is saying that we can do it, the Word of God says that we can, then any thought that makes us think that we can't do it is a thought that's contrary, is anti-Christ, is anti to the Spirit of Christ over our lives. Jesus let us also know, if I can find my scripture here. If you live in me, abide vitally united to me, and my words remain in you, and continue to live in your hearts, ask whatever you will, and it shall be done for you. When you produce much fruit, my Father is honored and glorified, and you show and prove yourself to be true followers of mine. And that's John 15:7-8. That our goal is to live and abide in Him. Okay. Being sick doesn't mean that we're not supposed to follow the biblical scripture or to become Christians. Jesus said there's only one thing that keeps us from Him. He said it's not your diagnosis, it's not the fact that you hear voices or see things, it's not the fact that you're in a wheelchair or that you can't walk or that you're dealing with a disease or you have herpes, hepatitis, whatever it is. That's not the problem. That's not the thing that's keeping us from Him. He said it's our sin. He said His ear is not so heavy that He can't hear, or His arms are not so short that He can't reach us. The problem is our sin. And once you've taken care of the sin problem, and we have to continue to abide in Him, let's continue to trust Him, continue to ask for whatever we want. God, pray that you would heal me. And once we've done that, we've cast our cares on Him, then it's our job, our responsibility to continue to live life to live life to the fullest, to live life to bring Him glory, right? Sin in the form of diseases comes to take away, to mute that glory. Because if we're so focused on our illness, our symptoms, and we're not managing it properly, that we have to wind up, we're just not managing it properly, then the enemy would like for us to do that, because he desires to kill, steal, and destroy. And if he can kill, steal, and destroy us by us not managing our illness, our symptoms properly, he would love to do that, right? When we talk about what is the cause of a mental illness? The cause varies with the illness. There are several different types of mental illnesses, over 19, in a different category. So it just depends on the illness. For example, we know PTSD, for example, may come about as a result of trauma. We know sometimes postpartum depression comes about as a result of postpartum depression. We know there are chemical imbalances with certain illnesses, so it varies. We know the brain mediates. But here's the thing. It really doesn't matter the cause. We know that Jesus Christ has the cure. Right? But here is the thing. You don't want to get so haughty that you're going to tell Him how He should heal you. Just because you have a mental illness doesn't mean that you're demon possessed. Now, here's the thing. We do know biblically from the scripture that some illnesses were. But we also know biblically from the scripture not all of them were. Because Jesus, in some cases, He said that. In some cases, He didn't say that. So we know that it varies. So mental illness doesn't mean that you're demonically possessed. Now, we know that in every illness that we have, because it changes our mood. Right? When you're not feeling well, it impacts your mood. It impacts how you think. It impacts, you may feel down or sad, or just because you can't do what you want to do. It may make you feel anxious. I heard someone say they were recently diagnosed with COVID, and he was saying the big thing was, he felt fine, was just the anxiety about what's going to happen next and feeling a little down about that. So again, when you have your sickness, all these types of words, these down words will come in and try to join with our sickness and make us feel a certain way. But that doesn't mean that we're actually demonically possessed. And if you feel that you are, or that a person is demonically possessed, that mental illness, that's what it is, then I would encourage you to pray for that individual and set them free. And then after you pray for that individual and set them free, right, quote unquote free, then their next step will be for them to continue to take their medications, to do what they need to do to stay whole until their healing kind of catches up with them, so to speak, if that's what you believe. But keep in mind that whatever disease that you have, you still belong to Him. You're still precious in His sight. He will meet you wherever you are. He is not holding it against you. You can continue to declare your healing. You can continue to declare your healing and say, I will walk, even though you're in a wheelchair. Right? You can continue to say that, because that's what the Word says. But you allow the Word to do what it needs to do. You allow the Word to bring into manifestation the things that we've asked for. And you can continue to trust Him. You can continue to trust the nature of God You accept where you are. Not accept doesn't mean giving up. It means I've accepted that this is where I am right now. I continue to believe that what the Lord is going to do, and as I walk with Him, He will heal me. Okay, in the time He sees fit. So again, kind of got off track there, but I wanted to just talk about the importance of being ready. Importance of being ready in the life of someone who's living with a severe and persistent mental illness. Either you're the loved one or the person that's actually with the lived experience. You have to be prepared. I said this before. It's important right now. If you make sure everybody should have a phone, right? Everybody should. If you can't afford one, you can get a free phone through Medicaid. Everyone needs to make sure that they know how to get their medications if they're unable to get out. If it's possible to have a little extra medications. I know it's hard because those pharmacies are really strict about if it's every 30 days, it's every 30 days. But you want to just have something in case it's an emergency and you need to, and you're you're out of medications for a little while, or you can't get to the pharmacy, your doctor can't call anything in, that you have something just to hold you over. You want to be prepared. This is the time to make sure you have some extra canned goods, all that stuff, just to prepare you, just to be prepared, right? Again, especially if you're living with a severe and persistent mental illness. So this has been It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach, and I started talking about the most recent shooting of a man who was having a psychiatric crisis, and the police showed up, and I'm not sure exactly what all happened, but the police shot him. According to and I'm sorry, I'm reading this. They wanted mental health to figure out the caller's husband yelling, but almost to the point of physical violence in the house, is heard in the dispatch. So, and again, I'm just kind of reading this. It's something I want to share with you. Right, so just kind of keep that in mind why you are calling the police, right? You should have a plan, you should have a reason why we are calling the police. Okay? You don't want to just call them and want them to figure it out. If you don't know, they don't know. So what do you want them to do? And they're going to do what they're trained to do because they're police officers. If someone is acting violently, they don't know why the person is acting violently, they're going to respond. Again, this is your loved one. You know them better. And this is something I really liked as I was reading this here, and this is something that I think I alluded to, but let me point out. When you have an agitated individual who might have a pervasive mental illness, the appearance of law enforcement in full uniform might exacerbate the symptoms because of fear or agitation. So kind of keep that in mind. When the police show up, your loved one, it may make the situation worse just because the police are in uniform, right? It scares them. And especially if this is someone who's had dealings with the police before. Because remember, if your loved one is having a psychotic episode, for whatever reason, what do you mean psychotic episode? Meaning they're out of touch with reality, right? They see the police officer showing up. They might think about the last time they saw the police officer, and the police officer took them away to jail or whatever the case is. The bottom line, whenever you see a police officer, think about it even for yourself. If you're driving and you see a police officer, and if you're speeding, for those of you who speed, and if you're speeding, you see a police officer, you automatically respond by slowing down. Why? Because it's the police officer. But when a police officer comes in a situation like that, things can tend to escalate. So it's important for, like I said before, to kind of meet the police officer if you can, debrief them. Don't just make it seem like, oh, I just don't know what to do, and just throwing everything on the police officer. Have a conversation. Hey, this is what's going on. He or she have been taking their medications. We really want to get them to the hospital, but they won't go. Can you help us transport or help us get them to the hospital? If you know, it's important again to be prepared and be clear about what you want. Because if you know that you're calling the police so the person can go to the hospital. Then when you call 911, you don't want to just call the police. You want to ask for an ambulance to come too, right? So you can have all these, not all of these people, but the ambulance can come too, and maybe the ambulance will help. Because here's the thing, and again, just something to think about, varies with jurisdiction. It is true the police are the only people that can force a person to go anywhere, right? Because they have the authority to do that. By handcuffs, and they can take them. But if the ambulance is there, depending on jurisdiction, might be easier. Let me just say this: many police officers don't really like, and I don't want anybody to yell at me too much, but many police officers don't really like transporting people who are having a psychotic episode, right? Because what happens is the police officer, and again, depending on the jurisdiction, if it's just a police officer and they have to take the person, they're going to take them to the nearest hospital, right? Provided they don't, go to have a jail or warrant or something. But they're going to take them. When they get to the hospital, depending on the hospital, sometimes the police are the ones that have to wait with the individual, and they don't always like to wait. So, because they don't always like to wait. It kind of takes them off what they have to do. Depending on if the emergency room is crowded, then they have to wait, and then it could be a while. And then if they get there and the doctor decides not to admit, then that's a problem. So what you could do, if you, as much as possible, to make it easier or just for everybody, you can actually talk and briefing the police and say, hey, we'll follow. We'll go with you we'll jump in our car and we'll go with you to the hospital. So that way everybody is there. So you got them to the hospital. The police can leave and you're there with the individual or whatever the case. But keep in mind, if you don't want to be there with your loved one because they're out of control, then that means they're out of control, that there's something going on. Again, it's about preparing. It's about the better prepared we are, the less phone calls that we have to make to the police to come and follow up on a mental health crisis, especially if the person is living in a home with people, right? So if you're living in a home with people, family members, loved ones, you see your person deteriorating before they start to deteriorate. So it's important to jump on that as soon as possible, okay? So again, log on to our website, igbatt.com. We're adding more content to it as time goes on. Write us, igbatt, the number 1, at AOL.com, or give us a call. Give us a call. I'll just change my number here. igbatt.com is the website. Post Office Box 7432, Silver Spring, Maryland 20910. And I'm looking at, once you log on to our website, you're going to see the welcome to the home. Click here to enter site. So when you click to enter the site, this is where you'll be able to get look up the information in your state through SAMHSA, because we really want people to kind of do that. And again, let me give you our number here. We do have a 1-800 number, but I don't have it here. It's 301-755-5463. But just log on to our website, igbatt, number 1, at AOL.com. God bless you, and we will talk to you later.